live, and then I'll download it to YouTube as well. Okay. Where are we at? Okay. All right, so we are Facebook Live here, Carl, but I'm trying to find out. I can't. All right, I'm figuring this out because I can't. We are Facebook Live here, Carl, but I'm trying to find out. I can't. All right, I'm figuring this out because I can't. We are Facebook Live here, Carl, but I'm trying to find out. I can't. All right, I'm figuring this out because I can't. Facebook Live here, Carl, but I'm trying to find out. All right, I'm figuring this out because I can't. Facebook Live here, Carl, but I'm trying to find out. Okay, let's see. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Let's see if it's stopped here. Can you hear me, Carl?
I can hear you.
All right. So here we go. We are live on Facebook, and we're back on a Monday with Mick, and we are at the world famous Shenanigans in Sioux Falls, and this place is still standing after St. Patrick's Day. Within the last few weeks, we've had St. Patrick's Day. We've had Jefferson just down the road make the state boys and girls basketball tournament. Roosevelt win the state basketball tournament. So this place has been rocking for about 10 days, and we appreciate them having us here again. So we'd like to thank Shenanigans for having us. We'd like to thank Boss's Pizzas for having us last week in tea and for their sponsorship of our program, Mick. How's things with you, Mick?
Doing great, Tim. Happy to be here. Happy we got Carl here with us. Looking forward to talking to him. I don't know, spent the afternoon out at the Pentagon. Things can only get so bad if that's how you part of your job.
Yeah, that's your job, is to go and watch people work out and talk to people that are having some exciting things going on in their lives. So we look forward to hearing your stories that you're writing on those things as well.
Yep.
So let's get right to our guest, and excited to have our guest and humbled to have our guest. And Carl, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm always excited to be part of anything that has anything to do with South Dakota.
Well, we are 100% South Dakota. We've got to mention, Carl, you're a basketball coach and played basketball in high school and a basketball fan out here in South Dakota right now. Yeah, I mean, you're not that far removed from it, but South Dakota State USD women finishing the seasons. Obviously South Dakota State's still going. It's been an exciting time in South Dakota here, and South Dakota State men had an incredible Summit League season and tournament. Played well in the tournament as well. So we've been fortunate here in all three state tournaments for the boys that finished last week were unbelievably competitive. So I know you appreciate good basketball and love South Dakota as well.
Well, and I'll say this, I think South Dakota State's women should have been in the field of 68 for what it's worth. And I don't know what they have to do between USD and SDSU to get that respect on the national stage. But I saw somebody tweet this, and I don't remember who it was. I thought it was a really good point, though. They said, find any other state in the country where there's 2 college women's programs that have advanced to the Sweet 16 in the last 2 years. I mean, you can't find it. And that speaks so highly of the programs that they've built there. Hopefully someday in the not too distant future, both teams will be able to make it in on a regular basis, regardless of who wins the Summit League championship.
Absolutely. And with that, some people have said, well, it's because the Summit League is down and, it's top heavy, but it doesn't matter. The best team should go, whether that's if you're the best team in the Big Ten or, for the football championship, or if you're the best team in the Pac-12, whatever it may be, the best team should go regardless of how tough your conference is, I think. So I appreciate that aspect and thoughts on that. So Carl, we're going to talk a lot about, we're going to get to know you. Okay. We're going to talk, you're a coach. First of all, you're a Mitchell native. You're a coach over in Minnesota at Waconia, and you've been there for quite a while. You've written some books. And I don't know what's going on, but you decided to become a politician as well. But let's start with the recent stuff and then work our way back, so to speak. And it's been quite a time in your life the last few weeks.
Well, yeah, I guess it actually kind of started in November and December, although I didn't know what the diagnosis would be then, but I got my COVID booster shot in early November, and it really knocked me out for about a week, which was not the case when I got the second shot back in March. I was down for about 36 hours, and just I was sweating and fevers and feeling terrible for a week. So I went to the doctor, and they said, well, 6 to 7 days isn't too uncommon for symptoms. You'll be fine. Then fast forward to early December, and I was still having weird heart issues. I wear this Fitbit, and I've been tracking my health and heart for a while, and my heart rate was still elevated a month later. So I went back to the doctor, and they said, your heart's healthy, but on a blood test, I was mildly anemic. And they said, that probably means you're bleeding internally somewhere. So it took us until mid-January to find out why and where that was. And that's when I was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. So initially the thought was, okay, well, you have this, but we'll do chemo and radiation and surgery, and we'll get all this out of here, and you'll probably be fine. But on February 14th, Valentine's Day, the day that I started radiation and chemo, a doctor interrupted in the middle of chemo and said, hold on, we got to do a biopsy of your liver. And what they discovered a week later is the cancer had spread to my liver. And it's at that point with this particular type of cancer, they say, there's nothing we can do. Once it spreads beyond that initial area, you're stage 4 and incurable. So it's been quite a ride for my family and I, and still trying to process some things. But they say with chemo, I might be able to extend my life to about a year. If I get lucky, maybe a little bit more than that. And so that's what we're going to try and do. My boys are 10 and 12, and I think all this would be a lot easier to take if they were a little closer to adulthood. I look back and I feel like I've lived a good life. I don't have a lot of regrets, but having boys that age is the only thing that's made this kind of tough.
Well, I struggle to even know what to ask or how to the conversation, because you get that news, and I mean, how do you go on? How do you face the next hour, the next day with that kind of shoved into you?
Well, I think we've all kind of contemplated what it would be like to hear that news, and I was certainly among those people that did that, but I guess you really never know until you get it. I know that I think through it all, I've been pretty stoic. I don't think at any point I've felt hopeless. I've been realistic, and I know that doctors know a lot more than I do, so I'm not in denial. But yeah, I think here's the way I would describe it. My wife and I did kind of the morbid stuff right away. We looked over life insurance and we made sure we know, all right, here's what you're going to have when and if this happens, and we tried to get all that stuff taken care of. And then I've spent time over the last couple of weeks recording videos for my sons in the event that I'm not around for certain moments and times that they might need some advice and things like that. So I'm trying to make those preparations, but at the same time, I'm trying to stay positive and hopeful that something miraculous will happen. Or, if I can, one of my goals is to stick around long enough for that next big breakthrough in cancer treatment. I don't know if a year is long enough, but we're going to try. And so I think in general, after that initial shock, that first week, my wife and I didn't really sleep. I mean, you just can't, because you're so consumed with all these different thoughts and emotions. But since then, we have taken our boys to Florida for a week, and that was fantastic. It was the thing that was great about it is everything just felt normal for a week. I told my wife, I'm leaving cancer in Minnesota. When I get on the plane, I'm leaving it here. It'll be here when I come back. And we were pretty successful at doing that. It was just great to feel normal again, just feel like a family on a vacation. And then a little less, actually it had been a week ago yesterday, I flew to Washington, D.C. And the only Pentagon I'd seen prior to this is the one in Sioux Falls. But I actually got to see the real Pentagon and all the sites in Washington, D.C. I'd never been there. And so I got to cross that off the old bucket list. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to Fenway Park. I'm a big baseball guy. That's my first love. And though I'm a Twins fan, I have a lot of admiration for the history of the sport. And I've been to Wrigley, but I'd never been to Fenway. So we're going to cross that off the list in a couple of weeks too.
I'm glad that you're able to do that now. And again, it takes me back to how much we appreciate you taking some time with us, because we know how valuable your time is, and you understand how valuable your time is. So we, again, really appreciate that. But, maybe touch on, you mentioned your wife a few times. How important is that strength of her and that love that she has for you, and being able to work through this situation, like, that nobody can really prepare for. Like you said, we think about it probably.
Right. Well, the thing I'll say is I've had so many people that have dealt with cancer of all kinds reach out to me and offer advice and suggestions. And one of the common themes is never forget about your spouse, because it's in some ways it's tougher on them than it is on you, because they're not just in the moment fighting the fight, but they also have to prepare for life after it. And there's a whole lot of other difficulties that come with that frankly I wouldn't have to be around to deal with. And so and then the other thing that has been brought up is the caregiver. Unfortunately, my wife hasn't had to do a lot of that yet. I still feel pretty good at this stage, but they get forgotten about. Everybody showers their attention and love on the cancer patient, and we forget about the person that's doing most of the work taking care of them. And so that's something that I think everybody's got to keep in mind. If you know anybody that has cancer, it's great to support the family and to support the person, but don't forget about the spouse or the loved one that's doing all the work behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I go in, to schools when there's been a trauma or a tragedy, and I say that to the teachers or the administrators. You're taking care of all these kids, but you got to take care of yourself as well. So wish her the best and tell her we're thinking about her just as much as we're thinking about you, and we appreciate everything she's doing for you through this time. So Mick, I know this is pretty heavy stuff for us, but we really appreciate it.
Well, Carl, when you're dealing with people who are going to, when they hear your story, are going to be, I don't know, upset, startled. I mean, it's a very difficult deal. How do you deal with that? How do you talk to these people, and what do you say to them?
Well, I've always been pretty blunt. That's one thing about being a transplant in Minnesota. um, my way of doing things. And my friends here in Minnesota that I've brought back to South Dakota, they realize it's not just me. That's just kind of a South Dakota thing. We just tell it like it is. And everybody here is Minnesota nice. I'm just South Dakota blunt. So when somebody says, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and I say, "Well, I'm not dead yet," you know, don't write me off just yet. And so I don't know. I think I've kept a pretty good sense of humor throughout the whole thing, and you know, I just let people know that I know what the numbers are, and I'm clear-headed about it, but it doesn't mean I'm just gonna lay down. We're gonna do everything we can to get as much longevity as we can, and that's just my nature. So I, when it comes to people that are downtrodden, that's them. They can stay that way if they want, but I won't.
So maybe touch on growing up with sports and then becoming a coach, and how that, you know, everything that you go through in a season, winnings and losses, and, you know, kids being kids and all that stuff, how that has helped you this last few months.
Well, you know, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was actually just texting with a lifelong friend of mine, Ryan Miller, who's an assistant coach at Creighton, and obviously the Miller family is well known in South Dakota. But Ryan and I grew up together. We graduated together, and we were roommates in college. So we've been in the same fantasy football league for about 26 years, you know. But anyway, we were talking about that very subject, that it's one of the great things about athletics is it prepares us for so many things in life that we would never learn in a math class. And being involved in athletics and growing up with competition kind of prepares you in a unique way for this kind of a battle. Because, you know, well, I mean, I looked at St. Peter's the other night and getting to the Elite Eight, and I texted a couple of my friends and I said, I have a better chance of living 5 years than St. Peter's had of getting to the Elite Eight, you know, so if they can get there, who the hell knows for me? But anyway, it's athletics is so important to develop the tools that you need to deal with adversity. There's a thought for the day I share with my students, and I actually just recorded it for my sons, and it says, it's really easy to be a good teammate when you're winning. But then I add to that and say, but that's not the time it's most important. The time it's most important to be a good teammate is when you're down by 12 with 5 minutes to go and everybody wants to start pointing fingers at each other. That's when you got to be positive and encouraging. And it's really easy to be a good spouse or a good husband, wife, daughter, son when there's a lot of money in the bank and everybody's healthy. But that's not the time you need to be a good husband or wife or daughter or son. It's when the stuff's hitting the fan. And so, you know, that's where we're at right now. And thankfully I was trained that way. So now I know, all right, there's no sense in curling up in the fetal position. No, and my boys have heard me say this for years. Nobody ever improved their position by pouting or whining. So we're not going to do any of that here either.
That's good stuff, Mick. That's really good stuff. You know, you mentioned, maybe we'll come back to some of this as well, but you mentioned humor and athletics. We have to talk about the Mitchell Colonels and the famous story of the free throw.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Mike Hendrickson reached out to me actually before my diagnosis, and he said, I'd like to get that story in our next book. And so I actually typed it all out for him and shared it with him. But I can't tell you the whole story right here, because if I were to do that, it's about 20 minutes. Yeah. I mean, if you want to get all the background and stuff that leads up to it, but yeah, so the thing that I'm most well known for in Mitchell, even though I'd like to think I did a lot of good things in the community growing up. I mean, I was a pretty good baseball player, and I was the student body president at Mitchell High School my senior year. The way I was introduced at graduation when I gave our commencement speech was, not any of that stuff. Here's the guy that goaltended a free throw. That's how I was introduced. So, you know, it's and I was a horrible basketball player. So it's nice I'm known for something, related to basketball. But yeah, that was a fun moment. And then the other thing I'll just mention is, we were playing Sioux Falls, Washington at the time, and we were up by 40. It was the last game of the regular season at the Corn Palace. The only thing I was good at was blocking shots. That was the only thing that and setting picks. I could set a good pick, but a lot of people can do that. So because I would only go in for 2 minutes in a blowout, when I couldn't possibly lose us the game, which was shrewd coaching by Coach Munson, by the way. Because I would only go in that circumstance, I wasn't loose, and I was just kind of nicking balls. I wasn't swatting them into the 10th row of the soft seats at the Corn Palace like I wanted. So I decided, well, I got to change my plan. And I just started practicing goaltending at practice, and everybody thought it was a joke. They didn't think I was going to do it. Well, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. So it ended up happening. But the two things I loved at the end of the story, Munson comes in the locker room after the game, and the first thing he says is, "Their coach wanted me to tell you thanks." And I did not expect that. He says, "That's the only point that kid scored all season." So the other bench kid hadn't scored all year. The only point, by the way, he scored in his high school career was that, because we got connected on Facebook a few years ago. Somebody was putting the story out there on Facebook, and he's like, "That was me. That was me." But then the other fun one was, after the game, my parents were sitting in the stands, and there were about 4 old ladies sitting right in front of them, just community members that come to the game, like happens there in South Dakota. So these ladies didn't know it was my parents sitting behind them. But right after I goaltended the free throw, one of the old ladies looks at the other ones and says, "Oh, that poor kid, he never plays. He must not know the rules." So it's a fun story.
Absolutely. So you graduate from Mitchell, go to college, and you end up being a teacher and a coach. And is that something that you thought you wanted to do your growing up, or how did you get into teaching and coaching?
Well, I wanted to be a lawyer until I was about 16, because I thought that was the best path into politics. You said, "Oh, you became a politician." Well, I was enamored with politics and government way before I liked sports. I mean, I'm talking 7 or 8 years old. I was into politics and government. Then I realized, do I really want to go to law school for another 3 years for something I don't really intend to do for that long, be a lawyer? So then I thought, well, what can I do if the politics thing doesn't work out? And then I'll, if I end up sticking with this career, I want to have a career that I'm happy with. And that's how I got into teaching and coaching. But Coach Munson was a big driver of that too. I mean, he's the biggest reason I became a coach. I grew up, watching him on TV at the state tournament, and then getting the opportunity to be on the team that senior year and learn from him. He was just a terrific mentor for me. But then, yeah, after graduating from Northern State, the first job I was offered, I won't say the town, but it was in southeastern South Dakota. It was in March of my senior year of college. I went down and interviewed for the head boys basketball job. And I got a call the next day. They offered me the job. And then they said, "We'd like you to be our head football coach." And I said, I thought I interviewed for the basketball job. They said, "Well, you did, but we hired somebody for that. We think you'd make a good football coach." I said, "No, that's not in anybody's best interest. That wouldn't be a good fit." But that job was going to pay me $19,500 a year. This was back in fall of '99. And so I thought, maybe I got to cast a wider net. Maybe I got to look a little further than South Dakota. And that's how I ended up in Minnesota. My first contract was for $26,000. So I was rich. I didn't even know how I was going to spend all that money. And I've stayed here ever since.
That's very good. You've kind of built that program at Waconia up from, they didn't have a whole lot of history, right?
Well, I mean, they had history, but it was a history of heartbreak. I mean, the program has historically been pretty good, but it never made it to the state tournament. And so many near misses. And I'd heard all about them in my first couple of years. And then I got to experience quite a few of my own heartbreaking last second losses when you're you're seconds away from going to the state tournament. And the program just seemed snake bit. And So yeah, that's ultimately what my most recent book is about. But just to clarify, I stepped down from coaching 3 years ago. And I've been the executive director of the Minnesota Girls Basketball Coaches Association, and kind of focusing on that and being a better dad and husband. And so the guy that was my JV coach, he took over and finally got him over the hump. And so yeah, the book it chronicles that season, but also kind of gives some of the background of why this was such a big deal, because of all those generations of kids that had those near misses and had been living the rest of their lives wondering what if. It was kind of cathartic for all of them, I think, for hundreds of kids that had worn that uniform, and coaches that had came before us.
And to see a town, that you've kind of, now Waconia's your home, you've been there, that school system, you've been there for long enough to, just really be proud of it. And to see them finally succeed, that had to be, even though like you said, you weren't coaching, had to be just a lot of pride and a lot of joy for you personally.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I got emotional when they made it, but I was in a hotel room in Florida. One of the great things about not coaching is it allowed us to finally go away on spring break, which we had never been able to do because that was always during the playoffs. And so we were at Magic Kingdom. We watched the fireworks go off, and then I threw my headphones in and I'm listening online as we're riding the bus back to the hotel. So I missed like the first 5 minutes of the game, but I listened to the rest of it. And just as we got back to the hotel, we'd been in our hotel room for maybe like 3 or 4 minutes. It became pretty clear they were going to win. They were up 10 with about 90 seconds left, and the tears just started rolling down my cheeks. I was so happy for them, and like I said, everybody else. It was, yeah, it was great for the community. And I mean, you guys know this, and that's one of the nice things about where I'm at. Waconia is just removed enough from the metro area where there's still that sense of community. We're not a suburb, but we're close enough proximity that if I want to go in and see a Twins game, it's a half-hour drive. It's not bad. But anyway, the whole town shuts down and businesses have signs up in their windows, and that's the great thing about high school sports, is the way that it unites a community. And that's something that club teams will never do. And I think that, as more and more people are putting their focus on club sports, that's the thing that high school sports has to hang its hat on, is how it really brings the community together like nothing else can do.
Yeah. Mick grew up in Austin. So Mick, you're familiar with that, the town,
Oh, totally.
following those high school sports.
Well, and just more recently, just covering small town sports in South Dakota for 30 years, almost 30 years, and seeing how in a lot of communities, it revolves around high school, and more to the point, high school sports a lot of times. And there are some tough parts of that, but overall, it's a heartwarming to see what a high percentage of people in a smaller town get behind what's going on at the high school.
Absolutely. Yeah. Carl, you mentioned your latest book kind of chronicled that run to the state tournament, or getting over the hump, so to speak. Maybe touch base on that book, and then your first book as well, because you've penned a couple of them.
Well, since you're teeing me up, I'll do this. So
all right, there we go.
This is the most recent book. It's called The Other Side of Glory, and Gopher coach Lindsay Whalen was kind enough to write the foreword, which is, it's nice to have her name on the cover, but there's a lot of other prominent coaches, including Tim Miles, South Dakotan Tim Miles. He has a line here up at the top, but the thing that people have said, well, why did you write this? And I think that one of the great takeaways from the book, beyond the fact that I just think that there's a character, and I call them characters, even though these are real kids, but I mean, there's somebody in the book that every player on every team can identify with. You've got the kind of rising star sophomore that's getting more minutes and being the leading scorer. And now, how are they going to handle the upperclassmen and some of the resentment that comes and things like that? Then there's a junior coming off of ACL surgery kind of wondering if they're ever going to be the same, if they've lost a step and nervous heading into the season. There's another junior that's being recruited by Division I schools, but not sure if her performance is up to par. And as the coaches are coming to watch, she's not playing well and she's getting nervous about that. And then my favorite characters in the book are a couple of seniors, one that had been a starter and a star that was asked to take a reduced role on the team, and then kind of following how she processes that and deals with that as a captain, but always putting the team first, even though inside it was kind of tearing her up. And then there's just kind of this deep bench kid, the 12th person on the team that's a senior, that only plays when they're up by 20, kind of like me. So I could relate to her. and then I think a lot of coaches would read this and unfortunately be able to relate to the coach, because despite the successful season, it was tumultuous. And I think a lot of people that have been around coaching would tell you, sometimes your toughest seasons are on paper your best.
Yeah.
We're 25-4, but dang it, that was a tough year, because there's so many egos to manage, and there's demands and parents and scholarship things. And sometimes it's just easier when you're 12-15. And I mean, nobody wants to be 12-15, but sometimes it's easier. So, and I think the other big thing about the book is hopefully it sends a message to kids everywhere and coaches that it's not a smooth ride to success. We look at state tournament teams and we just assume everything's hunky-dory for them, but it's not. Every team deals with difficulties. It's just a question of how do you navigate those, and are you going to stick with it through thick and thin and keep battling and reach that ultimate prize like they finally did.
Absolutely.
And then you asked about the other one. So this one's been out for almost 11 years now, but this is The Politics of Coaching. And the inspiration to write that was one of my best friends in coaching got fired. And when I went down to spend a weekend with him just to kind of reflect on how and why did this happen, because he'd been very successful, wins and losses, very successful. And he did everything right. He worked with the youth programs. He did a lot of stuff in the off season with the kids. But he had his best player get injured. They, had a mediocre kind of 500 season. And then boom, that was it. He was out. Well, having that conversation with him, I realized there was all kinds of red flags that were going on that he just didn't recognize because he was oblivious to politics. I, who was a political science major in college and grew up, paying attention to it, I said, geez, that was a warning sign. And that was a warning sign. And it made me realize he's typical. I mean, that's how most high school coaches are. They say, I don't want to deal with the politics. I just want to coach. Well, the thing I try to convey in this book in various ways is you ignore the politics at your own peril. You can say, I don't want to do that. Well, then don't expect to coach very long. It's part of the gig. And so you either embrace it and use it to your advantage, or you become victimized by it. And so there's all kinds of advice and anecdotes in there. And, some of it's controversial, and well, it's controversial. I just say it's just the truth, right? I mean, that's just how it is. And some people can say it's
bluntness.
Anyway, it's that book. I don't know what the exact number is now, but I know as of 2 or 3 years ago, it had sold over 5,000 copies. And when I wrote it, I thought, well, if I can sell 500 of these, that'd be pretty good. But it still sells. I mean, I don't know. I still get a check every month. Not huge, but I get a check for doing nothing, so that's nice.
That's good. Mick, any thoughts on the 2 books?
Well, I don't know if this is exactly on the 2 books, but just being around kids, teenagers for 2 decades, how has that played into everything you are?
Well, that's an interesting question. I know I have said I've seen an evolution in education, but it's not so much the kids as the parents. The kids are still great. And I love going to school every day. There's something that they say or do that makes me laugh every day. So that's a privilege. The thing that I feel like has changed culturally is, back in 2000 to say, 2007, 2008, if a kid screwed up at school, made a bad choice, and the parents get called, then the parents would say, all right, Billy, school's going to punish you and we're going to take care of this at home too. And then something started to change right around 2010, give or take a couple of years, where now we have a generation of parents that come to their kids' defense, no matter what it is they do. I mean, this wasn't my class. We had a class a year or two ago where a kid got caught red-handed cheating. I mean, just blatantly cheating. And so the teacher said, well, I'm going to take your test and we're going to go down to the principal. And the parents came in and were blaming the teacher and blaming administration and trying to defend their kid. And I think that's the thing that concerns me is we got a bunch of parents that are trying to be friends to their kids instead of parents. And I don't know what we can do about that in education. We can teach kids, we can't teach parents. But I think that that's the thing I've seen change. Kids are still good. Parents probably need a little work.
Absolutely. I think one thing that I always kind of think or kind of process is kids want to be taught. Kids want to be instructed. Kids want to be told they want rules. And, and they understand that there's consequences. But like you said, it's the evolution of the parents is now not to let them fail, not to let them get in trouble. It's somebody else's fault, or you can't punish my kid because of this. And it's very interesting dynamic.
I think the quote is attributed to Lou Holtz, but I've used it for years and years as a coach and as a teacher. I really love the quote where he says, discipline isn't something you do to someone. It's something you do for someone. And then I make sure I kind of point out to the kids, here's what that means. Discipline can be punitive, but it shouldn't be. It should be instructive to help you not make that mistake again, or to learn a life lesson so you're going to be a better person as a result. Discipline is best when you're doing it for someone, but I just think we have a lot of people that don't want to discipline at all. And it ends up not being advantageous to that kid down the road.
Sure. So now let's move from goaltending a free throw to a coaching career to an author, and now you decide to get into some politics. How did, obviously you said that already, that interests you from a young age, and how did this opportunity come up for you?
Well, when I got out of coaching, like I said, I was a better father and husband, but I'm not good at doing nothing. And so I thought, well, city council is a pretty good thing to pursue because it's two meetings a month, every other Monday, and then, an occasional third meeting. So not a lot of time away from the family, and obviously in town all the time. So I thought that's a good way to whet my appetite and get into the arena without sacrificing family time. And so, yeah, back in 2020, I ran for city council and won, and had one full year on the city council, and I really enjoyed it. It's I know it's incredibly boring for a lot of people, but not for a government nerd like me. I'm fascinated by about 80% of it. And now, I've been away from it. We actually had a special city council meeting this morning at 8 a.m., just brief. But I've missed the last 3 meetings prior to that, getting treatment and dealing with this. But I'll serve for a few more months. And then ultimately now I'm going to resign so then my position can be on the ballot in November, because I want the voters to be able to decide. Otherwise, if I just kind of hung on and, who knows what happens, well, then the city council gets to pick who the next council member is. And well, I trust they would make a good decision. I think it's always better left in the hands of the voters. So that's what I'm going to do. I don't want to be selfish and hang on as long as I can. I'm going to let the voters decide who my successor will be.
So politics in a relatively smaller town, dealing with some of those same people that you probably taught.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, or some of their parents.
Yeah.
Waconia has a population of 13,000, so it's it's not dissimilar to Mitchell in the kind of community that I grew up in. But I will say this: I got a lot more emails as a coach than I do as a city council member. And, that's pretty crazy because my constituency as a coach was, maybe the 45 or 50 kids in my program, 9 through 12 and their parents. My constituency here is 13,000 people. But it just shows you where people prioritize things, and that's not good or bad. I just think it's an interesting observation. It's not to say that I don't get an email here and there from constituents about things, but not nearly as much as I got than when I was a coach.
Good stuff. As we kind of wrap things up here, I want to go back to maybe give us a sense, emailing, messaging you back and forth. Today's been a full day for you already.
Yeah. Well, actually today I had a little bit of a setback. I was supposed to go in for chemo, and then they took a look at my blood numbers and they said, yeah, we can't treat you right now. A couple of these things are too low. And so I was a little ticked off about that because I feel good. And I want to get this stuff in me to try and beat as much of this as I can. And, but I was also told that at my stage of treatment, this isn't that abnormal. After a round or two, a lot of times your numbers take a dip, and then hopefully in a week or two, they'll rebound and I'll get back on the horse. But, so again, just like a sports season, you have highs and lows. You win a big game and then you have a tough one, and you got to find a way to bounce back. And so we kind of come full circle here and appreciate how sports prepares us for life way more than a lot of, and don't get me wrong, I understand academics are important, but I just don't think we can ever lose sight of the fact that there are lessons learned outside the classroom that are at least as valuable and sometimes more. And, had I not been involved in athletics, I know I wouldn't be as prepared mentally to take on what I'm dealing with right now.
Carl, are there specific people in your sports past background that you kind of channel their wisdom or their actions given your situation?
Well, Coach Munson's the biggest one. I don't know. I still get upset thinking about the fact that he's gone, because he was so important to me, and he did so much for me, which he didn't have to do because I sucked at basketball. But that's the kind of guy that he was. I mean, he cared about people, whether you're the worst player or the best player on the team. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of fans in South Dakota didn't realize, is if you were just an observer and you watched him coach in a game, you would have thought this guy's a fire-breathing dragon, and I wouldn't want to put my kid within 100 feet of this guy. But he cared so much about all of his players, and it didn't stop when he was done coaching you. I mean, I guarantee if he was still with us right now, he'd be calling me every other day, checking up on me to see how I'm doing. That's just the kind of guy that he was. So he was really important. I think, I was really fortunate when I went to grad school to spend a year around Don Meyer. And, I picked up a lot of things from him, life lessons, tidbits like so many other people have. But I guess the other people I would credit are just the guys I grew up with, because I say they taught me how to compete more than anybody else. My dad was not an athlete. He's in the South Dakota Music Hall of Fame. He's a heck of a musician. My mom doesn't know the difference between a baseball bat and a bowling ball. So if it wasn't for those guys I grew up with, who knows where I'd be. But being out on the playground with Ryan Miller and Jared Anderson and Todd Sprang and Mike Riddle and all these guys that we went to war. I mean, we were in fist fights all the time out on the playground playing basketball and football. And I thank goodness for it, because it taught me how to compete, and it was great for me.
And, you mentioned Coach Munson, and I know you weren't the worst player ever to play at Mitchell, because that's Coach Roby, that's Derek Roby.
Quick note about Roby. I always like to say this when I can. He was my little league baseball coach. So when I was like 5 or 6, he was like 15, and he was coaching park and rec baseball. And he actually kind of got me started with basketball coaching, because he was coaching at Aberdeen Central when I was at Northern, and he hooked me up with a 9th grade boys job. So I owe a lot to Coach Roby too. But yeah, I don't miss a chance to take a shot at him. Nice job.
Absolutely. So, you know, as you go forward here, just know that everybody in South Dakota, we're thinking about you. We appreciate you. Appreciate your time tonight. But, you know, Mick, how inspirational is it that, first, one more question. What's it like? You said you don't even feel bad. How is that? You know, obviously, you know, you got some serious stuff going on,
Yeah.
but you don't feel bad.
Yeah, there's some cognitive dissonance there. It's hard to process because, I mean, I've seen the pictures. I know what's inside of me, and it looks really bad. But I don't feel bad, and so again, I just have to be appreciative of that, because I know it could be worse. I mean, I could have this bad diagnosis and feel rotten, and then I'm not as good of a husband and father, and we're not going out and making those memories like we're trying to do right now. So I try to see it as a blessing, but yeah, it probably does make it harder to come to terms with sometimes, to realize it. I mean, I find myself thinking this every other day. I'm like, it's hard to imagine I'm not going to be here at this time next year the way I feel. But I hope I am. I hope I am. I'm going to try to defy the odds. So we'll see how it goes.
Well, for sure, we all hope he is. Mick, any last questions or comments?
And this is maybe self-indulgent, but it seems like what we definitely have here is, listening to you, is retain a sense of proportion in your own life, and figure out and maintain understanding what's important and what isn't quite as important. And it seems like as human beings, we need constant reminders on that. We need them every day. But what would you tell people on that topic?
Well, I think two things. I've had a couple students that have gone through cancer, and they've reached out to me, and one of them has been really adamant, and I've tried to follow this. He says, you know, every morning you wake up, you better be appreciative of it, and just be grateful that you're getting another day, because that's something we all take for granted. You know, we get up and okay, let's go do my thing. Right now, I'm waking up and saying, all right, I get to do this again. And I think if we all adopted that mentality, we'd be a lot better off. I think the other thing I would say is there's a thought for the day, and I post one on my whiteboard every day for the students when they walk in, and we start every class talking about it. But the one that's really resonated for me since the diagnosis is, someday you'll just be a memory for people. Do your best to be a good one. And so I get a little bit more time to try and make sure that I'm that. And so I'm grateful for that as well.
Well, Carl, it's been a joy. If obviously there's going to be people that ask, what can we do for you? What, you know, can we, obviously, you know, can we, you know, raise some money for you? Can we say some prayers? You know, what do you need, Carl?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, my high school classmates were amazing. They raised $10,000 to help us go to Fenway Park, which is more than we needed, although it was pretty darn expensive because we're going that Boston Marathon weekend. Holy cow. I didn't realize that at the time, but that's why the airfares and the hotel rooms were really expensive. And then the people here in Waconia have been tremendous, and they've raised all kinds of money. But the fact of the matter is, it's great, and we appreciate that. But if the power of prayer means anything, that's what I need more than anything right now. And so I'll take as many as people want to send my way. That's for sure.
Good. We again, I'm not very good at this, Mick. You know that, wrapping it up, especially on a, because I'd love to talk to you for another 4 hours, but yeah, I know how valuable your time is, and you know, we just want to say again, thank you for your time. Thoughts and prayers are always going to be going out to you. South Dakota loves you, and Mick, you know, how cool is this that he took the time to spend it.
Very grateful for your candor and your spirit.
Well, thanks for the chance to talk to you guys. It's been fun.
All right. God bless.
Thank you very much again. We really appreciate it.
Thanks.